It was June 25th, 2020. It was a Thursday. It's the second last day of the school year. 3 dark months had passed since COVID-19 forced my students and I from our classroom. It was 3 dark months full of anxiety and greeting my students from the edge of my bed. A lot had happened during that time, but none of it prepared me for what I was going to experience that day, returning to my classroom. I was going in to pick up a few books and other supplies before the school year officially ended. I cleared the visit with my AP, donned my face mask, hopped on my bike, and rode in. Despite making this 15-minute ride every day before COVID, quarantine turned my legs into mush. I arrived at school gasping for air. After leaving my bike in a deserted parking lot, I labored up the lone flight of stairs that takes me up to room 227. I slid my key in the door, surprised that it actually still fit, and walked in. Here's what I saw. Now, as I reoriented myself to the space, I was blown away by just how big it was. It was huge. I even yelled a few times just to hear my echo. I smelled fresh paint and lacquer. The room had this aura of newness about it. It felt like a new apartment. Saw an equation on a whiteboard left over from Marx that seemed archaic. The more I looked around, the more I wondered what I used to do with all this space. And for a moment, I actually didn't know, because all I knew was Zoom. Then, standing there in the shadow of my now former classroom, a sinking feeling took hold. I remembered that humans used to fill that space, young, vibrant humans. It was humans that gave that place meaning, and now it was emptied of them. In that instant, alone in a space that I spent 14 years turning into a second home, I was deeply confused and alone. I was a foreigner in a place that I knew so well, a place I spent so much time growing as a man and a teacher. But now it didn't want me anymore, and I was not welcome there. I realized that day just how much my classroom meant to my career and my life. See, when I think about my classroom, the doorway plays a very special role. It's where class kicks off. It's a place of fresh starts. It's where I greet my students by name and begin again. Many of my students even have a special handshake with me that they do with me as they walk in. It's a ritual that acknowledges our physical presence. Over the last 2 years, I've had 51 unique handshakes with students. One of my favorites is the one that ends with a game of rock, paper, scissors. And just for the record, I always lost. Now, the Smartboard, while being a central component to presenting ideas in the room, has come to represent so much more for me. So, this past October, I found myself, after a day full of teaching, slumped under a Smartboard similar to that one, weeping. My stepfather, my dad, for all intents and purposes, had been sick with lung cancer for months and passed away. When I got the call from my mom about his death, under the Smartboard was where my pain landed me. The next year, believe it or not, I had a similar experience when I learned that my mom passed. Soon after I got the news about her, a student walked in the room, showed me a painting she just finished in art class. I held back sobs as we spoke for a few minutes about the painting. It was the colors, the meaning it held for her, that sort of thing. Before she left, sensing my sorrow, she gave me her painting, which still hangs in my room today. And that's it right there. While it has been a place of mourning, my Smartboard has also come to symbolize hope and personal growth. That's me in the 3rd grade. Now, like a lot of good-meaning white folks in this country, I grew up colorblind. Coming up, I ignored race and the harmful and pervasive effects of racism. After becoming a teacher, having never thought critically about what it means to actually be white, my colorblind lessons shaped my teaching for many years, and it still does. My Smartboard has been crucial in helping me confront this part of myself that I often want to deny. In 2016, after reading This Is Not a Test by Jose Wilson and attending a workshop by the late Wendy Menard, I first began to interrogate what it means to be a white teacher who teaches Black and brown students mathematics. I read about it, I wrote about it, but an important first step that Jose and Wendy helped me take on my journey was openly and intentionally acknowledging race in the classroom. I did this using my Smartboard to highlight Black, brown, indigenous, and female mathematicians for my students, just like Dorothy Vaughan here. It may seem simple, but standing in front of my students who are 85% Black or brown and discussing these mathematicians was an emotional struggle for me, and it still is. My heart would beat through my chest, I would pace the room, my palms would get sweaty, and trying to protect my image, I would fidget and stumble over my words. See, I hadn't leaned into and led these types of confrontations with race, gender, and privilege ever in my life. As a white male, I hadn't needed to, but with my students, I did. As mundane as it seems, the floor of my classroom has special meaning too. In my 7th period class last November, I was teaching factoring. All 30 of my kids were up at the 12 large whiteboards I have around the room. They were buried in their work. I was locked in, moving around the room, giving them feedback. Out of nowhere, as I casually turned my head to the right to look at some work on a nearby board, the room rushed to life, spinning wildly. In an instant, a severe case of vertigo shoved me to the ground. I collapsed. My head smacked that floor. Having never experienced vertigo like this before, after I fell, I lay there for a minute or two, wondering when my world was going to stop spinning. My students huddled around, their faces full of shock and concern, many thinking I was joking. Now, I've thought about that day I collapsed a lot. I've thought about how alarming it must have been for my kids to witness their teacher lose his ability to stand upright in the middle of a lesson. I've thought about the deep gratitude I have for their readiness during one of the scariest moments of my life. I've thought about the business-like nature of school and how results and regents reign supreme. The system says it values productive struggle and authenticity, but I find that vulnerability is not often a welcome part of what we do. Frankly, I find it hard to be human in the classroom. Well, it's safe to say I was human that day in 7th period. My vulnerability was on full display. There was no multiple choice question to hide it, no do now to take attention off of it. I was right there on the floor, all of me, and my students bear witness to it. My chairs, they're important too. Before remote learning, these 5 humble chairs were what I used for parent-teacher conferences. A few years ago, during conferences, I was meeting with a struggling student and her mom in these very chairs. I asked the student why she was having such a hard time keeping up with her work. She searched for words, but found none. And the result was 5 minutes of silence from the 3 of us. Her struggles went beyond math class, beyond school. She cried, her mother was at a loss, and so was I. I like to say we came up with a plan for tutoring, check-ins, and other things that are regurgitated during conferences, but we didn't. The moment was heavy and didn't allow for it. With other parents waiting to be seen, I simply got up and I hugged the mom. Nothing else could be said. They left. With no laptop to distract me and no desk to divide us, these chairs and that hug have come to embody my efforts to see my students, oddly, not as students at all. Instead, in becoming a parent myself 4 years ago, I now strive to see my students as sons and daughters, as brothers and sisters, as, above all else, people. And parents, they're not my partners, fellow strugglers in our campaign to raise and care for another human being. In addition to connection, the chairs have also been a platform for togetherness and excitement. 2 years ago, I found myself sitting in a chair in front of the room when this happened.
Don't cut his mustache. No. Don't cut his mustache.
You see, I have a tradition of growing my beard throughout the school year without shaving once. In my own cheesy way, the growth of my facial hair is a physical representation of the growth my students do throughout the year. And what you just watched was what happens in June. I bring in my clippers and my students shave my beard. My students leave me, and so my beard must too. 15 minutes in that chair is a tribute to 10 months of growth. It's a spirited and unforgettable moment of community. Right now, many teachers are missing out on things like assessment and engagement. I am too, I get it. But for me, it's much deeper than that. And being removed from my classroom, I'm missing out on part of who I am. Some people give these kind of talks to step out of their comfort zone, to find their voice, to inspire change. For me, this was a talk of healing. I needed this. I can only hope that by thinking deeply about and exploring the relationship I have with my classroom, I can somehow reconcile with the fact that it is so different now. Someday, when things get back to normal, I'll return to room 227. Don't know how or when, but it'll happen. When that day comes, just like June 25th, 2020, I'll ride into school, put my key in the door, and be surprised that it actually still fits. I'll walk into the room and probably feel alone once again. But then the bell will ring, my students will flood the space, I'll learn some new handshakes, and I'll find a way forward. My beard will be ready. Thank you.